Hope you guys are doing well. Let's continue on our journey in React. So today we would be trying to understand the async nature of React, and also we will try to understand component lifecycle. Uh, so using both of these, we'll try to understand how React is going to work, and then we'll see some examples, and then we'll try to understand why and how to use this process, and then we'll also see like why it is async, and we'll see the component uh, component life cycle process, and then we'll see how useEffect is going to work. Before that, just let me check if the stream is running as expected, and then we will go on from there. Okay, perfect. So now in this we are going to understand React as in an async behavior, and then we'll try to understand like why we say React is asynchronous, and we'll see a little bit more about like React architecture, because it's the more you learn about the architecture, the more you will understand how things are going to work, right? Okay. Now, React's internals are what makes it an efficient and powerful under the hood. So React manages. The way React manage. So what all does React manage? So React management. So first is basically it is going to do. It is going to work with virtual DOM. Now, then it is going to do the reconciliation process. Then third is the fiber architecture. We'll see everything in detail. And then how does the hook in functional components have interact? So hook tracking, and then scheduling and batching. So we'll see all of them in little bit detail. And then we will see the component lifecycle, and we'll try to understand the functional lifecycle as well, because I feel even that is a little bit important. And then before that, just let me pull up this window. Okay, let's have this thing here, and let's get okay. Now I guess my OBS is okay, perfect. Now the way React is going to work is, so it is going to do the going to work in the following stages, right? Now what is going to happen is, in the first process, what we are going to do is we are going to create the virtual DOM. So basically this is not the actual HTML DOM, but a virtual DOM is created over here. Now the advantage of using virtual DOM, The React does not manipulate the real DOM, so we are not working with the real DOM here. It's the virtual DOM that we are going to deal with. Now, instead, what does React do is it creates a virtual DOM. This is a lightweight. So the normal DOM is HTML DOM, right? So instead of having an HTML DOM, we create a lightweight version of the DOM, but then it is in JS. So lightweight JS DOM. Now compare it with so what it does is, so whenever there is a state or a prop changing, right? So whenever there is a state or prop changing, what we do is we kind of create suppose if this was my JS DOM before the change, right? So I have this root element here, then I have this div, and then I have another div here. So after the state management, what is happening here is so the elements are present as it is, like there is no issue with that. It's just what I'm doing is, so here is my root, right? And then I have my div. So with this div, what I'm doing is basically I'm going to add or change certain properties, right? So for example, I change the content over here using useState. Now it is going to make a comparison between this. That is why I said we need that unique identification, right? So that is where that key comes into picture. So we need to identify first of all which of thing has changed. So now this and this will be compared, right? So only these two things are changing. So the rest is as it is. Now once it comes to know that this has changed, now it is going to identify it using its key, and then it is going to make the minimum possible change. Now instead of re-rendering the whole thing, it is only just so this is going to be present as it is, right? So this root and this div will be present as it is. Only what is going to be re-rendered or being which will change is this thing. So we will re-render this part. So this part is going to be re-render. We will be re-rendering this part. So this is basically where we do the re-rendering. So this is what we mean by re-rendering, right? Now now the way it compares this to is nothing but the way or the algorithm used to compare is nothing but called as reconciliation. So algorithm used to compare is called as reconciliation algorithm. Is called as reconciliation reconciliation algorithm. Now basically it figures out what just needs to be updated or what needs to be removed or added. Yeah, so key and prop, or what are we going to use? That key is what becomes important over here. So this key parameter is going to be a very important for our re-rendering process. Now fiber architecture. Now React's re-rendering engine is called as fiber. A fiber gives React now the what do you say, the engine that does that re-rendering is nothing but called as the fiber. So that engine which performs that re-rendering process is called as fiber. Now what does it do is, first it gives uninterruptible re-rendering. That means this re-rendering cannot be interrupted. Second is it will prioritize, like it will prioritize certain UIs. You can prioritize, priority can be given. And the last is concurrency. Concurrency is basically you can do multiple tasks can be scheduled. This enables us to perform features like concurrent threading, suspense, and transitions. Now the last or the next stage that we do is basically the hook tracking, right? So in functional components we use hooks, right? So the fourth processing that we are going to do is basically something called as hook tracking. We're going to track which each and every hook. Basically, first is where it is called, the state value of the hook, and the setter function. So this is very important for keeping a track whether my, so we need to because this whole thing is doing this comparison, right? So we need to understand where the comparison has occurred. If we don't know where the comparison has occurred, then we won't be able to do the re-rendering. The last thing that we do is something called as batching and scheduling. So we'll see batching. The last thing is nothing but, or the fifth thing that we perform is called as batching, or uh, is batching. And now this came in React 18 and above versions, right? Now this batching works even inside timeouts. Now using a feature called as automatic batching. Now we'll see like what this batching is, and why we say uh, React is asynchronous, right? Now when we say React is asynchronous, that means now we are not talking about asynchronous in JavaScript like promises, right? So in JS we have some code that will run after some time, right? Those are basically called as async, right? So by rules, suppose if this is a program written in JS, right? So by default JS will be synchronous, so it will run from top to bottom. But then what it will do is, now instead of stopping at this particular point, this will be scheduled to work later on, and it will continue its process until some value or some update has been made. So this is basically nothing but when we say event driven programming, right? So does React do the same thing? No. Now in terms of React, we say it asynchronous is because the DOM updates are not done in one go. So the DOM updates are not made in one go. Instead, what we do is something called as scheduling and batching, and we'll see that. So the DOM updates are not done in one go. So since they are not being done instantly, we say something as React is asynchronous. So in terms of React, when we say it is asynchronous, what we are trying to imply is the DOM updates will not happen instantly. Instead, there is a time, or it will take some time to happen. The DOM updates will not happen instantly. Instead, we are going to go through a process called as batching and scheduling. So we will see how this batching and scheduling works. Okay, let's see that. Now, batching means grouping multiple stale updates together so that the React can re-render the component only once instead of re-rendering it multiple times. Okay. So what is batching? Batching is nothing but the synonym or English synonym. So batching means grouping. Like you have batches of, for example, when you are in a factory line, right? You have batches, right, of drinks. So like if there is a faulty product, then you can identify from which product was the from which batch is that product from, right? Now on similar lines, now batching in React is basically grouping the re-rendering, right? So basically batching is basically grouping re-rendering. That means we are going to group all the things that needs to be re-rendered. So basic is nothing but uh, grouping re-renders. Now with batching, now React batches keep updates these. So for example, now let's see what would happen if we were doing something without batching, right? So for example, I'm doing set count, and then I'm doing a name, like I'm increasing the count by one, and then I'm setting a name. Now although this may occur in a different part and this may occur in a different component or a part, but then what React, so if there was no batching, then we will separately re-render this, and then after this has completed, then we will re-render this, right? So we are slowing down the mechanism, right? It's somewhat like pipelining, right? So instead of doing it in one go, so instead of doing it in multiple times, what we do is we try to do it in multiple, like what we do is we try to do everything in one go. So by doing this, what we are achieving is first of all, we're not wasting time, right? Like we are having we are grouping all of them, and then the moment we know that we are the moment we have batched it, and uh, then we can give it for scheduling, right? So hence we say batching and scheduling, right? Now scheduling is a part of React's Fiber architecture. It allows React to prioritize updates, resume pause and resume re-rendering, and avoid blocking the main thread, right? Why scheduling? Because think of it that not all updates are very important, right? For example, typing an input will be a very important one. Then loading a list of products, again, that will be the next priority. So everything is not going to happen in one go, right? So what we can do is we can using the fiber mode, we can prioritize them, and then instead of, so first we are going to do the batching, right? And then in this batching as well, we can select like which all needs the re-rendering to happen, to be re-rendered first, and then uh, for example, if there is for example, there is a cart, right? So the cart item will be depend the moment you add the items, the re-rendering should occur, right? So it's not that important as compared to adding elements, right? So because that is a very major feature, right? You should be able to add elements to the cart, and then once they have been added, or once your adding is complete, then we should be able to um, uh, rerender them. So hence we say React is asynchronous in nature. Is what we are trying to say is that React will not update the DOM. So React DOM updates will take time to occur. Now why it takes time is because it undergoes a process called as batching and scheduling, right? So by batching means we are basically going to group and try to minimize the number of re-renders, and then by scheduling is what we can do is we can have a different priority re-renders, so we can prioritize which thing should re-render first as compared to other. Now let's see how is the React components life cycle, right? So as studied previously, components can be of two types, right? Class based and function based. So we are not going to deal with um, we're not going to deal with class based components, but let's see what happen. Our main goal is basically to understand the function based components, right? So so let's see what happens when we have class based component, and like what are the different phases that it goes through. So component life cycle in React is basically how uh, yeah, it's basically how like what are the different stages through which a class component will undergo, and then we will try to compare it with functional components with hooks. So because hooks are only present in functional components, right? So let's see component lifecycle. Now in React, the component lifecycle refers to a phases a component goes through when it is created to and when it is removed from the DOM, right? So because we are dealing with the virtual DOM, so there are three phases. So we are having three phases. The first phase is nothing but called as the mounting phase when we are going to add the component. The second phase is nothing but called as updating, basically when we are going to update the component. And the third is basically unmounting, or when we are going to remove the component from the DOM. So the first phase that happens is the mounting phase. So in class based components you have something called as a class, right? So it's more of OOP class based thing structure. But remember, JS was built to support functions, right? Because everything in because JS has this because functions are lightweight in nature, right? So we don't want to go back to the class based OOP. Instead, we want to use functions to achieve our tasks, right? Now, so if it was a class, then we would have a constructor, right? So first is when we call the constructor, and then when we check did the mounting has done. Now once the mounting is done, now then we are going to check if there is anything that we need to update or do the re-rendering. And third is basically what we are going to do is we are going to unmount that component. Now let's see. Okay, mounting the component is understood, right? So why do we unmount it? Like if we unmount it, then what are we doing? Now when we unmount a component in React, basically it gets removed from the DOM. The component is removed from the component tree. Its associated DOM elements are removed from the real DOM. But then, so what is going to happen is it is going to be removed from the DOM. But why do you want to remove the component? So why does okay? So by default, it is not going to do the unmount. So for example, if we want to do it, then we will be doing the unmount, right? So like yeah, that doesn't make sense, right? Okay, so like React unmounting is not. So like what we can do is we can control each of these three phases, right? So we can control them. Oh, so basically what he's trying to say is we can control the three phases according to our needs. I see. Now Yeah. So now so this is basically in class based, right? Now let's see the similar thing action in using hooks, right? So using hook. So using now first thing is we need to understand that um, so used in use state there will not be any mounting or unmounting, right? Because use state is just used to store and update. I mean there is no mounting as such what is happening in use state. So in use state there is no mounting or unmounting phase. Now then when we come to what to say use effect, now this is where the mounting and unmounting will be important, right? Because use effect is designed for side effects like life cycle hooks and class components. You can use this. Okay, so basically now use effect is where we would be using the mounting and unmounting. Now the goal of use effect is basically it is to so when to use, we know when to use state, right? So when to uh use use state is if we need to store or perform some updates, right? Store or like update a value. So this is when we do um use state. Now when we should use effect. So when to use, when we want to do uh when we want to do side effects. Now let's understand more deeply like what are these side effects, like what is side effect. Now side effect is anything that runs something outside the component or it is affected by the outside world. For example, now side effect, now let's see little bit in more detail about side effect. So what is side effect? Now when we use state, we are in the component itself. So we are in the component itself. But when you want to do something called as anything which is outside the component is called as uh, is called as side effect. Okay. Now now let's see some examples, right? For example, making an API call, right? So API call, this is not related to the component, right? We are going to go outside of the component, get the data from the server, right? So one example is making an API call, right? A second is getting data from storage, right? Again, getting data from either it could be from a database, uh, or either it could be from a local storage thing, right? This is thing not related to the component. Again, for example, uh, when we need to do some uh, okay, more example will be, for example, timers, right? We need to maintain a timer. Again, this is going out of the component. Then performing event and listeners. Again, we are not in the component, so again we can use side effect. This is a side effect thing, right? We're going to out of the component to do DOM manipulation. Okay, this is again, this is not with respect to the component, right? We are outside of the component. Now, what use effect does is, now it will run the code after the component is rendered and control when the effect runs using dependencies, right? It will do the cleaning and everything. So React components re-render many times, right? If you do a side effect directly in the component body, it will be happening on every re-render. We don't want that. We just want once that, for example, data, right? Once to call the data on once, like on the initial render, give me the data. So we don't want that thing to happen on every re-rendering. So hence we use side effects, right? Okay, let's see more places where we make use of use effect. For example, a loading spinner, right? While the data is being fetched, right? So, but so the thing that is outside the data would be um, okay. Let's try to understand that single re-render. Like we don't want, for example, this is a web page, right? For example, let's assume this is YouTube, right? So this is, now you want this YouTube to refresh only when you go and manually do the refresh, right? And then you want the data to come in. So until and unless there is anything happening to the data, you don't want to um, uh, do the re-rendering, right? You just want the re-render to happen only you just want it to run only once on the initial render, right? You're not causing any other effect to you're not causing any other component to re-render, right? So then this is basically where we will be using use effect, right? Yeah, we only want to run once the component mounts. We don't want to keep on running it again and again. But then if you see useState, right? So useState will do the re-rendering multiple times as and when the value of the state is going to change, right? So we don't want that to happen. So useState is basically, you can split useState as every time there is a state change, you kind of do the re-render, right? But then in use effect, your main idea of thinking should be like what should be, like when what scenario should we use effect is when we only want to do the rendering once, only once, like that is only when the the initial page load, only that time we want the render to happen. So then at that places you can think of using useEffect, or other places is when anything that is not related to the component, right? Rendering to happen only once, that is during the initial phase. However, if you see use effect, you see, oh, use state. Now this will perform re-rendering as and when the state changes. So this is only the difference between use effect and use data. This is a major difference, or when to use effect and you or use state. So like during designing, we need to identify, right, which hook should we use. So this should be the major point of concern. Do we need to re-render um, every time when the state changes, or do we only want to render it during the initial stage? So yeah, I guess that is all for this lecture. I hope you guys liked it. I'll see you in the next one. Probably we'll try to code something now, since we have already done CSS and everything else. So yeah, we'll start with some coding examples, and then we'll see global storages as well. We'll try to have a routing mechanism in place, and then we'll go on from there. So yeah, that's all for this lecture. I'll see you guys in the next one. Till that time, take care. Bye bye.